We are extremely happy that you have chosen this session, Moving Through Life. Before we begin, please allow me to introduce our speaker. You will find a more detailed bio in your printed program. Dr. Martha Eddy is an accomplished alumna of Teachers College whose work in exercise and movement therapy impacts people in all ages and stages of life. She is the founder and the director of the Center for Kinesthetic Education and has developed curricula and movement therapy programs, including Moving for Life, dance exercise for cancer recovery. And now, I'll turn it over to Martha.
Thank you so much. I'm going to talk about the Center for Kinesthetic Education, which was developed in 2005 after I had taught at TC and the dance department got closed. So I was here for 10 years in the dance department, also as a student in movement science and education, where I got my doctorate in physical education and curriculum development. So hence you will see quite a lot of different curricula evidenced here. Some of the things that we do through the Center for Kinesthetic Education is, for instance, working with the Department of Education, Physical Education Department, training people in doing the physical best testing, and working with dance. I was one of the people to help write the blueprint for dance, as well as the blueprint for dance for children, students with disabilities. Also, a huge premise of the work is learning by doing. And as you can imagine, being at TC, that's an easy thing to say. I was pleased by this title, Dewey, as in John Dewey, or Don't We? So if you haven't read this issue, I think you're going to love it. I've always thought it would be fun to create the Dewey Doing School. And my interest is very much in the experiential basis of learning with recognition that experience or behavior is actually movement, even if it's speech, because speech is produced through movement. Technology also puts another spin on all of this, but even with technology, there's usually some human movement behind it. So body-based, multisensory experiential learning is the basis for what we do at the center. And some of the examples that I'll be speaking to are the idea of how we use not just neuromotor development, but perceptual motor development and perceptual phenomena, how we attend. So some of the work that I do works specifically with vision enhancement and movement exercises to help children and or adults, but you'll see examples of children, focus better and pay attention. Another piece of the work is highly integrative. We have recognized from the beginning, and this is very much part of my own doctoral research from TC, that as you heard this morning, healthy learning environments are really important for learning. And part of a healthy learning environment is the social emotional learning climate. So those of you in psychology will be contributing to that a lot. As a mover, I've been specializing in how body language is a key part of that communication process and those interactive processes. So the use of body awareness in conflict resolution is something I teach a lot. For instance, the outcome of my doctoral research, the title was The Role of Physical Activity in Violence Prevention Programs for Youth, looking at adolescents, mostly middle school and high school kids. The outcome was to start to teach a graduate level course for teachers and teaching artists in the role of movement and or dance in conflict resolution programs in schools. So I'm going to talk about movement a bit more. I believe we begin as nonverbal learners. We don't have language right away, but we're learning right away. And the studies are really widespread in terms of how much of communication is actually nonverbal. You see statistics from 60 to 90%. So you may need to check that and decide which you believe in. Babies, we know, are assessed by their movement abilities, whether they're able to roll, to crawl, to sit, to stand, to walk, to run. Physical ability then also impacts the social environment of that child. Once we see a child that's a little awkward, for instance, in the old days, there were lots of not great names children would get called. Now we're much more politically correct, but there still is an issue of physical awkwardness causing, really being a strong point in bullying in schools, okay? So as physical educators, as movement educators, as dance artists, as neuromotor specialists, we actually have a role to play in bullying, okay? One of the big questions I'm always asking is, does physical education or dance education programming meet all learners' needs? So for instance, in dance education, the hierarchy of being the best, the highly competitive, central prima dancer, it can be foreground in some educational processes. But in this work that is so social and emotionally based, as well as neuromotor based, we're looking at inclusiveness. So there is a movement mandate now, which is great. Physical education, dance educators, occupational therapists, physical therapists have recognized the importance of movement in infant development, toddler, pre-K to 12 education for a long time. But now, finally, research in other fields are making a case for physical development needs. We have, for instance, right here at Teachers College, Ms. Kagan's studies that are showing that movement is really important. It's included along with the social emotional climate. We also have the Citizens Committee for Children in Infant Brain Development in their policy briefing and saying we need more movement. And finally, and I think probably most powerfully, recent, it's been 3 or 4 years, preschool mandates saying that every small preschool, even if it's a family daycare center, needs to have, it's not very much, but it's something, 45 minutes of exercise included in their programming every day. We wish we had that for kids K to 12, but it'd be nice, certainly for preschool children. So our work is needed, and one of the issues I think we need to talk about is what curricula are we developing for these children, whether they're infants, whether they're preschoolers, whether they're in school. We know there's been a lot of great research in school. One of the things with the early childhoods is that we need to make sure, and this is coming from Sharon Lynn's research, Sharon Lynn Kagan's, that everything needs to be measurable, so observable and measurable, in the domains of physical health and well-being and motor development. And I'm saying consider using Laban movement analysis. I will talk about that. But one of the second jobs I had outside of TC was to teach qualitative movement analysis for one of my former TC professors out at San Francisco State. And the idea that quantitative movement analysis is really burgeoning is fantastic. But in the classroom, we need to be able to see and assess student development and student performance quickly. So this is one model that I'll talk to. You see the other categories that are critical in development. Here's an example of age 4 national standard in education. The motor development one is first, the ability to walk up and down stairs with alternating feet. Okay, so that's one standard. Those of you in this room most likely know that we could be looking for a lot more. Now, it's great that we at least have this one. It opens the door to a big discussion about what else are we looking for and what's the quality of performance of that walking up and down stairs. And it even raises the question of where are you going to watch the child walk up and down stairs? Do those stairs exist in that school building or in that preschool setting? We go on, and I'm going to go to the next slide to talk about how movement can intervene with each of the other domains. So in the last slide, we saw the social emotional domain, the language and literacy and communication domain, the cognitive and general knowledge domain. So these are examples in each of those domains. This slide is talking about ways that we as movement educators can intervene in each of the domains. So walking up and down the stairs with alternating feet, we may want to look at previous underlying motor skills, especially if they're not achieving that goal. In terms of understanding the consequences of actions on others, well, this is going back to the body language point I made earlier. Determine child's ability to read body language in others. How many of you are working with children on the autistic spectrum? Okay, not so many. One of the major markers of autism is the inability to read facial cues. And I would venture the guess that one of the reasons we say facial cues is that's all that's been studied. I actually think it's reading body language in general, whole body cueing, but the detail of facial cueing being a key point. Okay. Third, the use of imagination to create new ideas. Remember, this is age 4. This is a standard that we are trying to meet in our preschool classrooms. And I'm looking at the use of movement and play to stimulate the imagination. If children don't have play, how is that imagination getting, it could be through reading stories for sure, but why not read stories and then move them and dance them and play about them? So this is that multisensory idea, inclusive of the kinesthetic and of movement. Number 4, speak clearly enough to be understood by most listeners. Now again, I mentioned this before, speech is a motor act. So clarity of articulation has a lot to do with your ability to control your body movement. And I'd like to share that just today, I got news through LinkedIn that a friend of mine's paper got published along with her colleagues in the Frontiers of Human Neuroscience. So it's this April edition, April 8th. And it's called Neural Decoding of Expressive Human Movement from Scalp EEG. I bring it up now because expressive movement is a new term in EEG studies. We've looked at movement somewhat. There's a lot of artifact with EEG, so that's pretty tricky. It's a messy process to watch the brain if the body is moving. So one of their control factors was actually just thinking about movement. The point I want to make here is that this is the first study to really look at what quality of movement was performed with an action. And to be specific, I'll give an example. I can put my arm down. In other words, I can extend my elbow. But I can do it in many different ways. I can do it with a long, prolonged timing. I can do it quickly. I can do it with strength. I can do it with lightness. I can do it with a pinpointed focus. Or I could do it with a sense of inclusion of the whole room. That's 6 examples. I could do it with tension, or I could do it with kind of what we call free flow, passive play. They're studying this and what parts of the brain are activated. Okay? So again, back to speech. If children aren't able to access those types of variation in expression, sometimes we need to speak quickly. Sometimes it's helpful to actually prolong speech. Maybe there's a sound, like a vowel sound, that needs to sustain, and another one that needs a sharp bound tightness. So I'm talking speech therapy now. I don't know if I didn't ask if there were speech therapists in the room. But that ability to modulate the tempomandibular joint and the mouth region is going to impact articulation. So there we are with speaking clearly enough to be understood by most listeners. It's not just vocabulary. It's also the delivery of the language. Okay. Finally, knowing letters and basic shapes. Again, as an early childhood educator myself, one of the first things I did, even as an undergrad teaching in preschools, was getting kids to make the letter A with their bodies. This way of moving kinesthetically as part of retention can be really helpful. Okay, I spent a long time on that slide, so I'm going to fast forward through a few others. We even asked the question, why crawl? And there are many reasons to crawl well. It establishes a certain amount of spinal tonicity and coordination. We, in the neuromotor perspective applied in adult learning, will sometimes ask people to crawl even as adults. That's usually in a more artistic setting, but sometimes in a therapeutic setting. So I teach something called body-mind dancing, which is a class that attracts adults that have either never danced before or that are renowned choreographers and performers. And within that time together, crawling kind of equalizes the classroom. because everybody's got something to work on that's so basic that when you look at the performance aspect of it, am I able to sustain it for a long time? Do I slip from what we call cross-lateral into ipsy or unilateral movement? Do I feel uncomfortable in my wrists? Or what we look at with children, am I more internally or externally rotated? Do I have a wide base of support or a narrow base of support? Are indicators of movement performance. So with adults, this is just as true and very informative. So the very first course I taught at Teachers College was called Movement Retraining. And in that case, we drew in students from movement science, dance, even anthropology, and across other subjects to learn the basics of motor development. And then how this learning by doing, we would actually crawl, this constructivist model then informs the teachers understanding their own students' movement and how they may want to use movement in their classrooms. Okay. One of the other dialogues that has come up as a TC alum has been working with the notion of neuromaturational versus dynamical systems theory. Are any of you aware of that dialogue? Pretty interesting. One idea is that there are critical periods, and if you don't gain a certain skill by a certain age, then it's going to be impossible, was the original statement, to gain. Well, now we know it's just harder because the neural wiring is there. But what can we do if we miss that critical period? Because we know so many children really don't even have the environment to crawl in, right? The floors may not be conducive. Parents may keep kids in really tight boots, and so their ankles never really get to flex or dorsiflex or plantar flex in the way that is needed. So we look also at dynamical systems theory, and I'm really, consolidating information here and reducing it. Motor development, in this case, occurs in response to the body interacting with the environment to learn or accomplish a task. And this model has been really helpful for those of us doing movement therapy because we see the body is still containing neuromotor, neuromaturational history. So we actually, in our work as movement therapists, still work with reflexes, really basic, neurally wired motor responses, but we look at it in terms of the task that's being presented and the environment that it's in. And part of the task might even be how the mother is holding the child, or how the parent or the caregiver is interacting with the child. So that could be the type of movement, or it could be the type of environment. So I'm talking now, when I say we, about somatic movement, and I'm going to define the word somatic pretty quickly. It embraces both this neuromaturational and dynamical systems approach. It's the idea that the neuromotor aspect of somatic movement is that infants and toddlers learn about their world through movement ideas. And through movement, ideally conscious developmental movement. And my training was outside of the academy with two somatic educators. One was an OT and still is an OT. Her name is Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen. And the other was a PT. She died in 1981. I was her student just the last 3 years of her life, Irmgard Bartenieff. And finally, I also studied with Dr. Judith Kestenberg, who was a child psychiatrist. They all emphasized, even though I worked with them independently, that social and cognitive learning comes from a rich physical learning environment, inclusive of engaging with perceptual motor milestones at any time in one's life, so beyond the critical periods. And I'm saying this because again, I was their student in the 1970s, so they were working in this way in the 1970s from their own research. The stages of development that we work with may look familiar to you or not. The more typical terminology might be spinal homologous, hip homolateral, ipsilateral, and contralateral. One of my teachers just went to more body-based and spatially based language, head, tail, upper, lower, body halves, and diagonal. What also was groundbreaking about these women's work was that they all worked with the pre and perinatal period as well. So they're looking at movement as starting at the moment of conception, and the idea of breath being important, which then ties us into really needing to understand breath as well. And basic cellular movement, then moving into a child's movement in the in utero environment, and then finally into these ex utero skills that I've outlined. So somatic work is linked to the whole concept of mindfulness, and it is basically becoming aware of your movement. It's not that different from the word kinesthetic, really, because that is, our kinesthetic sense simply means our ability to sense our own body moving. And the word soma is a Greek word that means the living body. So the somatic sense is the ability to perceive oneself and gain information from the alive body. It's a confusing word because it also means voluntary nerves of the peripheral nervous system, and psychosomatic sort of divides the soma into two parts. But again, the definition we're using here is somatic cells self-regulate in the individual, and the soma only exists if it's alive. So we all have a body. And when we die, we still have a body. And then you have to decide what you want to do with your body, actually. But the soma is only alive, is only in existence when we are alive, excuse me. So it is the living body. It's the body that has self-awareness. So somatic learning is using bodily listening for self-awareness. So again, coming back to the science, and this is something as a dance artist and movement scientist, I go back and forth, and I didn't mention that I got my master's here in exercise physiology as well. How do we perceive our bodies? It's through the kinesthetic sense. Proprioception, positioning of joints, movement of the joints, the vestibular sense, positioning in space, stopping and starting, changes in speed and changes in direction, as well as the tactile sense, what we touch around us. And then I will add that kinesthetic awareness can be then supported by all the other senses, including vision. So you can see that they're fairly similar. The kinesthetic intelligence, which is included in Howard Gardner's understanding of what's important in education, thank God. It's just sort of sad that we think there are only 5 senses, and yet the awareness of our own body, proprioception is another sense, kinesthesia is another sense, and they're not taught. Children are not taught these words. People do not know how to spell these words. We've talked about that. Soma's a little easier to spell. But the idea that we actually pay attention to our body is now going to inform the rest of my talk, because it also helps with lifelong learning and health throughout the lifespan. So moving, not just exercising, but moving with awareness can really influence the quality of life that you may develop as teachers or in your own personal experience. So the kinesthetic intelligence registers movement in space, it recognizes stopping and starting, and it is also bringing in awareness of posture and movement habits. Somatic intelligence is the same, body awareness. The sense that if we listen to our body, this is the slight difference, we actually might get some information that we really want to pay attention to. So some people use it as an internal barometer to guide our sense of well-being and our physicality and in life. So, to reiterate, somatic activity involves slowing down in order to be more self-aware. It uses movement principles and practices. It integrates neurodevelopmental theories. It experiences the body as unified with the psyche. Some people even connect it to a more global sense that we all have bodies, so there's this universal shared experience. It's a shared biology. And for some people, that even becomes this kind of spiritual connection. It allows for both inductive and deductive processes. It can be therapeutic or educational. And the basis of somatic movement work is the breath, with movement, with touch, with sound. So I'll say that again. The basis of somatic movement is working with the breath, working with movement, working with touch, and working with sound. The notion of touch is one that is very regulated in school systems. And I've been watching this. One of my first papers handed in to me by a student getting her master's here at TC was on why can't we touch in the classroom? And looking at really the changes that were happening in the laws around touch, which were meant to protect children from abuse. Oh, this is going to be tricky. You may want to shut that window if you're willing. But I can talk louder. And in any case, thank you. the loss of just that gentle, kind of compassionate moment between teacher and student is something that we really need to investigate. One of the things that I teach in the social emotional work that I do, and I'll talk a little bit more about it, especially post 9/11, doing movement work with teachers in the classrooms at Ground Zero, was the need for warmth and compassion in the classroom. And with that, some of that is the interactive regulation that happens when you just give someone a hug, especially a little child. So one of the things we have noticed is that most principals do allow teachers, and especially physical educators and dance educators more than others, to at least touch the shoulder or just kind of give a calming touch on occasion. So we have a little bit more room for that than some teachers. Yeah. One last thing I always like to bring up is that there are a lot of mind-body disciplines out there now, which are really about using the mind to regulate the body, thinking, meditating, and controlling the body. This is a different model. It's saying that from the body, we are influencing the mind, that indeed the body is intelligent. It is part of the mind. Okay, so the body is a locus of knowledge and authority. It's pervasive because the nervous system is pervasive. Every part of us has intelligence. So we have awareness throughout our whole bodies. So I'm going to take a little movement break right now. I'm going to have you simply notice your body position and then change it. Just do something else. And now go back to the first position. You remembered it. So that is registering all the time. You have your movement awareness helping you at all times. Now you can decide which one felt more comfortable. And just go and make yourself comfortable, please. And which one do you feel is organizing you for attention and learning? Might feel different. So let's have a third. How can you be most comfortable and organized for attention and learning? Okay, how many of you put your feet on the ground? It's interesting, I saw about 6. Yeah, so having the feet on the ground makes a big difference. It's actually kind of allowing certain physical vectors to gain support. Okay. So I was going to talk some about reflex theory, and I can come back to that. But the main thing we're talking about here is that sensation informs movement. And I start with the sensory motor cycle, but then we're going to talk about perception, because how we perceive that sensation is going to make a big difference. So we perceive ourselves, or we perceive the environment, or hopefully we perceive both. You all just did a great job. So you organized your body. That was perceiving yourself to pay attention to me. I'm part of the environment. So I appreciate that. Okay. All senses are important. We use these for action. So being responsive is important to learning, dealing with stress, or building resilience even after trauma. So let's put the word in there. Being able to move is important to learning, dealing with stress, or building resilience after trauma. Movement is also expression. It is our way of sharing our experience. So movement as action happens through vocalization or movement. They're expressions of internal experience through our external means, which is our body. We talked about these organizations of the body, so now we're going to look at how we organize our body for attention. One of the first things that the somatic idea brings up is, why not start with resting? And I have to say, I gave a lecture at my undergraduate alma mater, and the kids were really tired. How many of you feel like maybe you're a little tired today? You got up on a Saturday earlier than usual? So, okay, right away, let's just rub our hands together. And if you've got glasses on, you can take them off or you can leave them on, but it's fun if you take them off. And you're going to cup your hands, and we're going to palm. And you've got desks in front of you, so you get to rest your elbows right on the table and cross your hands, not pressing on your eyes, but simply cupping over them. You're occluding the light. So if you can even open your eyes for a second under there and see if you could reshape your hands a little bit and make sure it's really dark, and then close your eyes again. This moment of darkness is a quiet time. Hopefully it's a chance to exhale and deepen your breath. But it's also re-stimulating the rhodopsin in the retina of your eye. we need darkness in order for our macula to strengthen, okay? So just taking that little moment would be great. Now I'd like you to open your eyes under your hands and just notice the color that comes in. Then close your eyes. Again, take your hands away. Notice how much light comes through your closed eyelids. And then gradually flutter your eyes open. And the question is, will you come back? Okay. So this is an example of doing something a little bit restful in the classroom, and it's something I've been teaching a lot across the age span in K-12 settings. Okay, and one of the reasons to do it is also starting, remember this list? We're going to go through it now. We're going through breath, then whole body connection, and I'm jumping right away to head, tail, the differentiation of the body parts, the upper and lower body, the right left part of the body, and the diagonal connections, the cross-lateral connections, and the hemispheric implications. So these are pictures of me working with children at the Center for Kinesthetic Education. A lot of them are children with learning disabilities. Some of them have motor disabilities. And the idea here is to engage the whole body to activate, both to become more alert and also to learn, okay? So the sensory involvement encourages both mental and physical flexibility, and it also can lead into, depending on what you choose to do, learning certain subjects. Flexibility is helpful between transitions and between within a class, and also from subject to subject or throughout the school building. So when I'm working with my conflict resolution work, these things all tie in. Teachers really think that I'm going to be doing classroom management with them often. So they ask about how can I control my classroom? And we talk about giving learners the skills to resolve conflicts themselves. But then there's this other issue of just how to deal with transitions. Those are often the hardest time of the day for educators. And one of the ways to work with it is to use games and to use the whole body and to infiltrate movement into these transitions so they're more fun and they actually serve as an effective rest, recuperation. So I am going to just show a little video for a change of pace. You'll still be hearing my voice a little bit. Well, actually not. I think we have a voiceover for this section, so that'll be good. And then I'll take a couple questions and then we can decide.
Eye-openers are mind-openers.
What we want to do.
Welcome to a look at tomorrow's classroom today.
Is that too loud?
Where the very problems of classroom management become the solution. This video is dedicated to you, the classroom teacher, and to your unique calling and dedication to open the hearts and minds of children. One of the most daunting and challenging tasks for teachers today is classroom management. Studies show that up to 50% of a teacher's valuable time in the classroom is spent on repeated attempts to get kids settled down and focused. Eye-openers are a series of simple, fun educational exercises based on the power of vision and the way our eyes naturally work to focus and direct attention. Science shows that as our eyes move, the body follows, focusing attention. Our eyes effectively form the operating system of human intelligence as they sweep up information 1,000 times faster than the ear, fully delivering 90% of all human awareness. This program is a type of visual education that includes the eyes, the body, and the mind. By relaxing, exercising, and using our eye-body coordination in physiologically sound ways, children are better able to focus on tasks, track a topic, switch gears effectively from blackboard to near focus work, and be aware of others in the room, while also filtering out any distractions. These skills are processed through the brain using an integrative exercise called palming. We actually close our eyes with the palms of the hands, gently covering them, and relax. With the eyes relaxed and visual stimulus diminished, the brain is able to integrate new knowledge. Children love to do this. Surprisingly, this is even true of children with attention and hyperactivity problems. Palming places a simple, effective classroom management skill that can be used at any time right into the palm of your hand. With eye-openers, you take a child's natural urge to move and play and transform that energy into creative interaction that can turn your classroom into a special place where learning can happen. Children moving randomly in the classroom can be a problem. With eye openers, the problem becomes the solution. You learn exercises that help children focus their bodies, their minds, and their eyes, enabling you to be a truly effective educator. Come join Dr. Martha Eddy, founder and director of the Center of Kinesthetic Education, as she takes you on an experiential journey, showing you how directed vision activities settle and focus the attention of a group of children with diverse visual and learning challenges. Hopefully, you'll be able to see how some of these pictures will be worth 1,000 words in your classroom. So now, relax and focus to discover and enjoy.
So I'd love to hear some of your impressions. I've been talking for half an hour. We have a couple-minute break. What was that like to watch?
Makes me smile.
Yeah, the kids are cute, aren't they? Yay. So that's a DVD. I had a copy of it here, yeah, called Eye Openers. And what's really fun about it is that it's got over 12 different 3 to 5 minute lessons. So teachers can just click on a lesson and use it as a break, a transition, or it can be the basis of something they do repetitively. And maybe the teacher just does it at home and then delivers the message for his or herself. Yeah. Anything else that you saw or you have a question about from anything we've talked about so far? Should I keep going?
Is there anything you can teach us? Because most of us work all day and sit in the office without really moving our eyes or our body.
Yes, yes. Basically, because the kids are so cute, I highly recommend just using this, but I am going to do one with adults pretty soon. I do a class just for my own sake about once every 3 months. So I have a little sign-up sheet if you're interested in just doing some kind of class for the eyes. I'd be happy to have you there. I bring this up also because similarly, as we move through the lifespan, I'm going to be talking about cancer recovery. And one of the things that happened when people started taking that class was some of the people would come that were friends or that were from the press or that were our teachers but had never had cancer. And they said, wow, this is really good for my upper body. The same work that we were doing to regain mobility in here is excellent for dealing with having been at the computer all day. So I'm glad you asked that question. These kinds of exercises can be really helpful for just being antidotes to sedentary lifestyle. Anything else? Yeah.
Have you done anything with visually challenged?
I have. I used to work at the Lighthouse some. And a lot of my work is private work as a movement therapist. So I have worked with different children. Over the years, I was just telling the story of having a young boy who had a baseball accident whereby he lost the use of one eye. And so it got replaced, and one of the things that I worked with him on was convergence and divergence, being able to use the two eyes together. Lots of stuff like that. Right? Okay, I'm going to keep going because I really have a lot, but it is really, for me, exciting to hear your ideas. So I think this is Escape. This is the website that what you just saw you can look at again. It's eyesopenminds.com. And there's a couple other examples in there. Okay, so this is back to that notion of rest and support. And because I have a friend here who's a specialist in parent-child attachment, I have to say that this is really a substitute sometimes for what we needed or need now or didn't get or liked so much with our parents, right? That early touch is so important. And so with adults, sometimes we just use objects, comfortable sitting positions. The chair can become an important support. And sometimes we forget. We get so invested in the computer that we forget we're sitting in a chair. So to actually take a moment and sit back and feel your feet on the floor and feel the support of the chair can be really helpful. And it can actually be groundbreaking in terms of prolonging osteoporosis of the spine or other kind of back problems. So here's a couple photos of me working with a child with fairly severe cerebral palsy, another child with attention deficit disorder. Just play and touch. In this case, I'm training the caregiver, the young boy's para, to work with him. Now we're moving into homologous movement. So I'm going to teach you something that, for those of you that are over 50, may actually remember from your childhood. Do you ever remember having to sit at the table like this?
Yeah.
It actually serves a function. So instead, because we don't kind of go for this position anymore, I'm going to ask you to simply place both hands or both feet symmetrical, not just in the limbs, but through the spine. Do you feel that? Now, it doesn't mean you can't still turn your head, and many of you did, but it does organize you. It actually, and this is some of the research that I'm hoping that functional MRIs will allow us to get into. There is a theory that this movement is helping us with organizing midbrain and stimulating midbrain and even some of the pedicles between the cerebellum and pons. So kind of bringing in that more midline use of the brain. Okay? Theory, it's worth investigating, and we need the instrumentation for it. So that's the bilateral. It's this sense of organizing and helping focus. Literally bringing the two eyes together, the two ears together for more stereo-optic and stereo-agnosis, stereo awareness. With that, we're able to increase focus. There's something called the Babkin reflex. When you press on the palms, the head will turn to midline. This is with a baby. So this is coming from that early neuromaturational period. You press on the palms of a baby, and baby might be here. You press on his or her palms, and they come to midline. Okay? You just did that by placing your arms on the table. You came to midline. So I want to just share one other tiny little intervention, but I think it's been significant. In OT, their trend is to talk about fidget toys. How many of you have heard of fidget toys? They're basically giving people these squeezy balls, and I guess it's physical therapy too, but in occupational therapy, squeezy balls, because if a child has attention deficit, they found that by giving them something to squeeze, to hold on to, at least it's expending that energy. Well, I then went in, why not use the neuromotor basis of our reflex theory? Let's use it as a focusing help. Let's ask that child to squeeze the toy this way, take that squishy ball and squeeze it together. And when they do that, they can then bring their attention and focus back to the teacher, to the classroom, rather than continuing the more creative play that they were engaged with, which often ends up with throwing it across the room anyway. So if you're teaching it to be a focus toy, the idea is that you're naming it as a focus toy, you're teaching the activity, which is using this reflex, and asking the child to really engage in something that's going to bring them into the classroom community rather than still be outside of it doing something special that all the other kids think is really cool.